r/Nosleep. Posted by u/UnKnownReadingYT. The cult I'm a part of doesn't give second chances. You haven't lived long enough to experience true pain. It was a mantra I'd heard countless times from our leaders before then took your offerings. Those words were spoken, followed by the blade being dragged over the limb that was the most healed. This usually meant that the blade reopened a wound that had just scabbed over and began the healing process. All the members were a patchwork of fresh cuts, scabs and scars, but we did it because we were told it was right. I'm surprised, knowing what I know now, that there wasn't mass cases of infections and deaths. I'm not sure if the others ever questioned anything, but I did. Often. Were we not entitled to our own blood? Why was it taken from us on such a regular basis? Surely they couldn't go through that much blood in such a small amount of time. With our family at over 100 members, it was hard to imagine they did anything besides take our blood and toss it out the back door. Did the others think of this? I didn't think so. Those kinds of questions are dangerous for cult members. The others were blind followers, some literally having given up their eyes to show their commitment to the family, but I was different. I knew I was. I had been with the family my whole life, being adopted by a couple who was already a part of the cult and who taught me from a young age the cult's tenets. Once I was a full member, I appeared to be a model sister, following the rules, not drawing attention to myself. Inside, however, I was looking for a way out. My 18th birthday was coming up, and that meant the family would be expecting me to bear a child. I planned to leave before that happened. Our most sacred duty of the day was our bloodletting. We would shuffle up in smaller groups to the altar room at our specific time. We all wore our special gown. It amounted to little more than charcoal-colored tank top and shorts that most would say came up too high. This was done to make sure it was easy to reach any spot on the body in order to cut. They drained us of our life force, making us woozy and weak, perfect for corralling us like beasts to the slaughter. My body may have been weak and tired, but my mind was sharp and keen, always searching for weaknesses and ways to escape. When we weren't giving away our life essence, we were doing menial tasks throughout the complex. There were various machines throughout, their pipes reaching upward through the ceiling to freedom, while we oiled and maintained their vital parts at their base. Each section of the family was responsible for a handful of machines whose purpose was given no thought to by most. I figured some were used to control the temperature, while others had loud fans in them, maybe to draw in air, but I've never been able to figure out their real purpose. Remember, children, you haven't lived long enough to experience true pain. Slice. My arm had nearly healed when it was recut open. The leaders were known as the grandfathers. They were never seen without their all-white gowns which went down past their feet, dragging as they walked. After bloodletting ceremony, their white and pure gowns would be stained a dark and deep velvety red. The grandfather ruled with an iron fist, and I never heard of them giving second chances. A devout member came to the altar to give his offering of blood when he was sick. Just before the blade had cut him, he doubled over coughing. The grandfather didn't hesitate. "Sinner!" he screamed, plunging the blade deep into the man's shoulder and jerking it around until he and everyone around him was covered in blood. This served me as a warning. If I failed to escape, there would be no forgiveness. I stumbled back to my dorm that day in a daze, both from the recent events, and from the blood I had lost from the large new cut going down my forearm. This policy of no forgiveness was very effective at stopping possible rebellions. Even if there were others that thought like me, I could never know for fear of being killed. The more I think about it, the more I am both impressed and disgusted by the grandfathers. Another powerful deterrent was the place we lived. Through a few tests I was able to conclude that it was definitely underground. The walls were solid, and the air constantly felt recycled. The damp corridors were always dimly lit, projecting an air of calm obedience over everyone. I planned, and I searched, but the bunker in which we were located in seemed to be a labyrinth. Only the grandfathers knew how to get out. They were the ones who brought us our food and water, and they were the ones who guided new blindfolded members down. They had perfect control over our ecosystem, and they were the apex predators. One day, while giving my blood, I felt a slight draft coming from somewhere. If I hadn't been searching for something abnormal in that exact moment, I might have missed it, but it was unmistakably a draft. With blood still fresh on my bloodletting gown, I decided that the altar was the best place to look for an exit. If I was going to leave, it needed to be soon. My birthday was approaching, and I didn't want them to be focusing on me while I was trying to escape. Days passed, my cuts multiplied, and I homed in on where I thought the draft was coming from. I knew I didn't have much time left and decided that I would go within a week. If I died, at least I wouldn't have to have a baby with some brainwashed cult member, And if I got away, I could start a new life somewhere else. Then, like a freight train hitting a car that thought it had enough time to cross without being hit, I thought of another problem. I didn't know where we were. I knew we were in America. Before my foster parents had switched me to homeschooling, I had learned how to read and write in school as well as basic geography. There was no way of knowing for sure where in America I was. I just hoped it was a part that spoke the same language as me. I tried not to get hung up on this. I could find somewhere to go once I got out. If I got out. I didn't plan every detail. I knew once it started all my planning would change and I would need to adapt. But I looked for places to hide in case my attempt failed. I stashed some food bundled up in a shirt at the end of a particularly dark and gloomy hallway I had never seen anyone go down, just in case. I planned out routes that took me away from the main areas. I memorized where places I could go to hide it were if they decided to search for me. Finally, I made the decision that if they found me, I would try as hard as I could to not get taken alive. I knew what they wanted me for, and I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. The day finally came. All my plans were at the front of my mind. The previous day I had walked to all my points one last time to make sure I knew the way and could get there without much thought. My nerves must have shown on my face, but I hoped it would be seen as excitement when I approached the altar to give my blood. I just had to stay alive till the night, and I could get out of there. I strode towards the altar with a confident and happy stride. Nerves racked me, but I was sure of one thing: this would all be coming to an end soon. There are sinners among us. The grandfather cried out from the altar. He produced a shirt with food wrapped in it. I was at the base of the altar with the rest of the people in my section, and every face fell simultaneously. If one of us failed, then we all failed. The door to the room slammed shut behind us, and in the vacuum, I felt it once more, a breeze. With the door closed, I could tell that it was coming from directly behind the grandfather standing on the altar. He stood there, shirt in hand, pure white gown rippling slightly. Whether it was from the breeze or if he was so angry he was shaking, I couldn't tell. I was so distracted and encapsulated by the man above me at the altar and by the cries of those around me proclaiming their innocence, that I almost didn't hear the gurgling coming from the other end of the line. I turned and looked at the other end just in time to see the bloodletting blade sink deep into the back of one of the older sisters. She stiffened where she stood, blood trickling out of her mouth and pouring out of her back. She let out a small cry which turned into a choked sob as she fell forward, sliding off the blade. The grandfather who committed the stabbing then moved to the next person, who was too distraught and begging for forgiveness from the grandfather on the altar to notice the silent killer stride up behind him and plunge his blade into his back. Already 5 lay dying on the ground, and I knew they wouldn't stop at me, even if they had special plans in store for me on my birthday. Every one of my plans had been ruined in just a few seconds. I weighed my options and found that the only one I really had was to go for it. To my knowledge, there was only one ritual blade, so if I could get past the grandfather on the altar quick enough, I could make it out. This is not how I wanted to do this. Stealing my courage, I took 3 deep breaths and charged forward. The grandfather on the altar must never have dreamt this would happen, since the look on his face would have been comical in any other circumstance. I ran right at him. He towered over me, but in the surprise of it all I was able to easily push through him and make my way to the back of the altar. There, behind a cleverly hid wall that was more forward than the rest to hide the doorway, was a staircase leading me to freedom. The tunnel had very few lights in it, and those that I could see were so dim that if it hadn't been so dark I would have missed them. Along the walls to my left ran a series of pipes, unmarked and bare, guiding my path up to the surface. To my right was a groove in the flood with a chain on it. I would later find out that it was a cart that was used for food and water to be brought down. I ran up, taking 2 steps at a time. The scabs and cuts on my legs tore open as I went, leaving my legs a bright red and making perfect outlines of my feet on the cool stone floor. I didn't want them to be able to track me, so I resolved to do something about it when I got to the surface. Ascending rapidly, I found a gentle bend in the stairway. Once around it I saw a vertical strip of light. Pushing the double doors open, I found that I was in a long tiled corridor. I completely forgot about my plan to stop making footprints once I heard it. A gentle roar of what sounded like people talking and feet hitting the floor. Stealing one last glance at the door I came out of to make sure I wasn't followed, which I wasn't, I began to make my way to the next set of doors at the end of the corridor. On the door was a simple bolt lock, which I cautiously flipped open and timidly pushed open the door. On the other side was hundreds of people, all walking back and forth. They wore normal clothes, and each of them seemed to be a part of their own world. I burst out the doors, not knowing what else to do, but needing to get as far away from the cult as possible. My sudden movement seemed almost to be my downfall, since all the blood I had lost from my cuts reopening had began to catch up to me. I stumbled forward, almost hitting the floor, before being caught by a man wearing all white shoes, gray sweatpants and a jacket with a plus sign on it. He didn't say anything, just stared at my obviously horrifying state. He didn't even notice when my blood began to get on his shoes. Others began to come and try and help him. They wanted to stop the bleeding, but there was too many cuts and I would have looked like a mummy if they had succeeded. Many people stayed with me and asked me questions while we waited for more professional help. Soon after the police arrived, the building, I would learn was called the mall, was closed for the day. Learning about a cult operating under a mall seemed pretty serious to the police. I knew that the owners of the mall, or at least a manager, would have to have known about the cult, but I kept that to myself, confident that the police would work it out someday. The raid met the bodies of all the cult members. It was a massacre of biblical proportions. All died by knife. Although I didn't go back down there, I heard that the walls were painted with blood. The grandfathers were never seen again, and I was soon after put into the witness protection program. I was given a new name, not that I even knew my old one too well, and a new life. I won't divulge any personal information, since I know a cult can work off the simplest thing. If you are in a cult, get out. They are always dangerous, and, usually, don't give second chances.